Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
Nobody expected sparks to fly when Julia Roberts sat down with Jenna Bush on Jenna and Friends. The day's topic seemed innocent enough. Should parents be friends with their adult children, or should they always remain authority figures? But what began as a warm conversation quickly turned into one of the most fascinating debates daytime TV has seen in years. Julia, speaking with the warmth and charm audiences adore her for, argued that friendship between parents and adult kids was essential, that it built trust, broke down walls, and created a relationship that could last through life's hardest storms. But Jenna Bush, drawing from her own experience as both a daughter and a mom, pushed back hard. She insisted that while love and openness were important, children, no matter their age, still needed parents to be parents. Boundaries, guidance, and authority weren't outdated. They were essential. For nearly an hour, the two women traded stories, beliefs, and emotional truths, pulling in the audience along the way. By the end, even Julia herself was nodding in reluctant agreement. It wasn't a walk-off moment. It wasn't bitter, but it was unforgettable. The studio lights glowed softly over the set of Jenna and Friends, giving the room a cozy living room feel rather than the sharp edges of a formal debate stage. Julia Roberts, radiant as always in a simple cream blouse and dark jeans, leaned back comfortably in her chair. Jenna Bush sat across from her, smiling brightly, her notes resting casually in her lap. From the opening moments, it felt less like an interview and more like two women chatting across a kitchen table until the topic at hand began to surface. Julia's voice carried that familiar mix of warmth and curiosity. So, Julia, today's conversation has stirred up a lot online already. We ask viewers, should parents be friends with their adult children, or should they always remain authority figures? The responses were overwhelming. People are really split. Julia's eyes lit up. "I love that question, Jenna," she said, with the kind of enthusiasm that instantly pulled the audience in. "Because as a mom myself, I've thought about it a lot. For me, I absolutely believe we should be friends with our kids, even as they grow up. If we're not, who are they supposed to trust? Who do they call at midnight when they're scared or confused? If we've built this wall of, I'm the parent, you're the child, and that's final." The audience nodded, a few scattered claps rising up. Julia leaned forward slightly, her hands animated as she spoke. "I want my kids to feel like they can tell me anything, not because they're scared of me, but because they know I'm in their corner. Friendship doesn't erase authority, it just means the love feels safe." Jenna smiled, but there was a flicker in her expression, a gentle tightening at the corners of her mouth. She waited until the applause died down before jumping in. "I hear you, Julia, and I think every parent wants to be that safe place for their child. But here's where I have to push back just a little. I think if we focus too much on being their friend, we risk losing something more important, being their guide. Authority isn't about fear, it's about setting standards and boundaries. And honestly, sometimes kids don't need a friend. They need someone who tells them the hard truth, even if they don't like it." There was a subtle shift in the room, not hostile, not even heated, but attentive. The audience leaned forward, sensing the first threads of disagreement pulling taut. Julia tilted her head, considering Jenna's words carefully. "But Jenna, doesn't friendship actually make those conversations easier? If your child trusts you, truly trusts you, won't they be more willing to listen when you say, 'Hey, I think you're heading down a dangerous path'? I mean, think about it. When you're young, who do you confide in? Your friends. So why shouldn't we, as parents, be both?" Jenna chuckled softly, though her tone carried weight. "Because friends can walk away. Friends can say, 'Okay, do whatever you want.' But parents can't. Parents have to hold the line. When I was younger, I didn't need my mom to be my buddy. I needed her to remind me, no, Jenna, that choice will have consequences. That's not friendship. That's parenting. Julia smiled politely, but her hands folded more tightly in her lap now. See, I think it can be both, she countered. It's not about giving up authority, it's about layering it with closeness. If our kids think we're just these rule enforcers, they'll shut down. They'll hide things from us. And then what? We've lost them. The audience murmured, caught in the balance between two compelling viewpoints. Jenna raised her eyebrows and nodded slowly. That's the tension, isn't it? How do we balance love, authority, and friendship without tipping too far in either direction? I guess what I'm saying is, when push comes to shove, I'd rather risk my child being mad at me for setting a boundary than risk them losing respect because I blurred the lines. For a moment, the two women sat in silence, not hostile, not even heated, but deeply thoughtful. Julia's smile was softer now, almost contemplative. Jenna held her gaze, calm yet firm. The segment was supposed to be friendly, lighthearted daytime talk, but as the cameras captured the quiet intensity between Julia Roberts and Jenna Bush, it was clear this was no surface-level chat. Beneath the smiles, the first signs of real friction were beginning to show, and the audience could feel it.
The camera cut to a wide shot, capturing both women as they sat opposite each other. The audience was unusually quiet, caught between the charm of Julia's warmth and the firmness of Jenna's convictions. What began as a polite back and forth was quickly growing into something more layered, more personal. Julia leaned in, her famous smile soft, but her tone steady. You know, Jenna, I get where you're coming from. I do. Parents need to guide. Parents need to set limits. But let me ask you this. How do you think kids learn best? Through fear? Through consequences alone? Or through open conversations where they don't feel judged? I've seen too many young people, especially in Hollywood, whose parents played the authority card so hard that their kids rebelled, cut ties, or went off the rails. Why? Because they didn't feel like their parents were on their side. The audience hummed with quiet agreement. Julia's words carried weight, not just as a mother, but as someone who had witnessed the darker edges of fame. Jenna listened carefully, her expression thoughtful but firm. You know, Jenna, I get where you're coming from. I do. Parents need to guide. Parents need to set limits. But let me ask you this. How do you think kids learn best? Through fear? Through consequences alone? Or through open conversations where they don't feel judged? I've seen too many young people, especially in Hollywood, whose parents played the authority card so hard that their kids rebelled, cut ties, or went off the rails. Why? Because they didn't feel like their parents were on their side. There was applause from parts of the audience, and Julia nodded respectfully, though her eyes flickered with resolve. I hear that, Jenna, Julia said slowly, her voice carrying both gentleness and conviction. But what you just described, your parents as your compass, that's exactly what friendship can be. Think about your best friend. Don't they call you out when you're heading down the wrong road? Don't they push you to be better? Friendship doesn't mean being a pushover. It means you care enough to guide with empathy instead of a gavel. Jenna crossed one leg over the other, her tone sharpening just slightly. But friends are optional. You can choose to listen to your friend or not. Parents don't have that luxury. They can't just suggest, they have to lead. And sometimes that leadership doesn't feel friendly. Sometimes it means being unpopular in your child's eyes. I think the danger comes when parents are so worried about being liked that they forget to be respected. The tension in the studio grew more palpable. Neither woman raised her voice, but the conviction in their tones filled the space like electricity. Julia, unfazed, lifted her hand slightly, as though painting her words in the air. Respect and friendship aren't opposites. My kids don't respect me because I bark orders. They respect me because I listen, because I value their feelings, and because when I set a boundary, they know it's coming from love, not power. Authority without friendship is like a wall without a door. You keep people out, even when they're trying to come in. That drew a wave of applause, stronger this time, and Julia's expression softened into gratitude. But Jenna wasn't about to let it go. "Julia, I love that metaphor," she said, her smile gracious yet tinged with steel. "But let me add something. A wall with only doors collapses. It has no strength. Kids might want constant friendship, but it's our job to give them structure. I've seen too many parents who tried to be their child's best buddy, and now those kids are lost, entitled, or unsure of who's in charge. That's not love either. Sometimes love is a firm no, even when it breaks your heart." The audience gave a collective murmur, half in agreement, half in hesitation. Julia sat back slightly, studying Jenna with the thoughtful gaze that had made her one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. "You know what I think this comes down to?" Julia said softly. "Fear. Parents are afraid that if they're too soft, their kids won't respect them. And others are afraid that if they're too strict, their kids will walk away. We're all balancing fear with love. But I'll always stand on the side of closeness, because I'd rather risk being seen as too much of a friend than risk my child shutting me out completely." The sincerity in her tone brought a hush over the crowd. Even Jenna paused before responding. "That's powerful, Julia," Jenna said finally, her voice steady but gentler now. "And I don't disagree that closeness is vital. But to me, friendship is optional. Parenting isn't. If I had to choose between my kids thinking I'm their buddy or knowing without a doubt that I'll hold them accountable, I'll pick accountability every time, because in the long run, they'll see that as love too." The exchange landed with weight. Neither woman raised her voice, yet the air felt charged, like two different visions of parenting standing face to face. Julia's emphasis on trust and openness versus Jenna's insistence on authority and accountability. Neither was willing to concede, not yet. The audience broke into applause, loud and divided, reflecting the split that millions of viewers at home would surely feel as well. The debate had gone beyond simple theory. It was about lived experience, about two women with different histories and values holding their ground. And though both still smiled and remained gracious, the friction was undeniable. What had started as polite conversation was now something deeper, something more gripping. It was no longer just about parenting styles. It was about what kind of America we want to raise our children in. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a silence that carried more weight than words. Both women sat tall and poised, but the energy between them had shifted. What had been a tug-of-war of ideas was now on the edge of becoming something rawer, something closer to the bone. Julia's eyes softened, and her smile dimmed just slightly. She rested her hands together in her lap, her voice quieter now, almost confessional. "You know, Jenna, I'll tell you something I've never really shared in an interview. When I was younger, just a teenager, I had moments where I felt completely unseen by the adults in my life. They were busy, distracted, or trying so hard to control me that I stopped talking to them about what I was really going through. And that silence, it was dangerous. I carried things alone that no kid should ever carry, because I thought, what's the point? They won't understand." The audience fell completely still. Julia's candor, so vulnerable, so stripped of her Hollywood glow, cast the studio in a hush. "That's why," she continued, her voice thickening with emotion, "when I became a mother, I promised myself I would never let my children feel that way. If being their friend is what keeps that door open, if it means they'll come to me when they're hurting instead of hiding it, then yes, I'll take that role, every single time." There was a beat of silence before the audience erupted into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was the kind that rises from the chest, stirred by something real. Jenna's expression shifted, and for the first time that evening, she looked less like the polished TV host and more like a mother herself, caught off guard by the weight of Julia's honesty. She took a breath, gathering her thoughts, before leaning in. "Julia, that's powerful. And I want to honor what you just shared, because I can tell it wasn't easy." Her voice wavered just slightly, then grew steadier. "But let me tell you my truth. I grew up with parents who were not just busy, they were under a microscope, with cameras at every turn, reporters waiting to pounce on every mistake. And yes, sometimes I wanted them to be softer or to put away the parent hat. But in hindsight, their firmness was what gave me security. Their rules and their boundaries told me, you are safe, you are guided, you are loved." The audience broke into applause again, more mixed this time, but equally heartfelt. Jenna pressed on, her voice carrying a mix of strength and empathy. "I hear your point about being a friend to your kids. I do. But for me, the biggest danger wasn't being misunderstood. It was too exposed. I needed my parents to be my shield, not my buddy. And sometimes that meant they had to stand apart from me, even when it hurt." Julia tilted her head, visibly moved by Jenna's response. "So, in a way, we're both talking about protection," she said softly. "You see protection as structure, as rules. I see it as closeness and openness. Different methods, but the same goal." "Exactly," Jenna said, her voice firm but warm now. "The goal is love. The goal is raising strong, secure kids. We just disagree on whether that comes through friendship or through clear authority." The audience clapped again, many nodding along, some visibly emotional. The clash was no longer about proving one woman right or wrong. It had become about sharing truths that resonated deeply with anyone who had ever been a child or a parent. Then Julia, eyes glistening slightly, leaned in once more to Jenna. "Can I tell you something else, Jenna?" Jenna nodded, her expression open. "My daughter once told me, 'Mom, I can tell you anything because you don't make me feel stupid.' That moment, I knew I was doing something right, because the world out there will judge her harshly enough. If home isn't a safe space, then where will she go?" The words landed with a weight that hung in the room. Several audience members dabbed at their eyes. But Jenna, her own eyes shining, didn't shrink from her stance. "That's beautiful, Julia, truly. But my daughter once told me, 'Mom, I know you'll always hold me accountable.' And you know what? That made me proud, because it means she sees me as her rock, not just someone who understands her feelings, but someone who will also guide her through them, even when it's hard." The two women locked eyes for a long, quiet moment, neither dismissing the other, but neither willing to surrender their ground. The studio was tense, emotional, and alive. What had begun as a debate about parenting styles had evolved into a profound, vulnerable exchange about what it means to love a child, whether through the closeness of friendship or the strength of authority. The cameras zoomed in, capturing Julia's tear-bright smile and Jenna's resolute but tender gaze. The emotional flashpoint had been reached, not in shouting, but in truth-telling. And as the applause swelled again, the audience wasn't just clapping for one woman or the other. They were clapping for the courage it takes to parent, the choices it demands, and the love that underpins it all. The tension that had filled the studio moments earlier now gave way to a quiet sense of reflection. Both women sat back, shoulders a little less rigid, their eyes softer as the applause gradually faded into silence. Julia took a deep breath, then laughed lightly, breaking the heaviness in the air. "Well, Jenna, I think we've both just given our kids a lot of material for therapy someday." The audience erupted in laughter, and even Jenna chuckled, shaking her head. "You might be right about that," she said, grinning.
Julia leaned forward, her tone warm and open. But honestly, what I appreciate most about this conversation is that it reminded me parenting isn't one size fits all. I've been so focused on making sure I'm approachable to my kids so they'll always come to me that sometimes I forget boundaries are a form of love, too. What you said tonight, it made me pause. And I think that's the beauty of having these talks. There was genuine admiration in her voice, and Jenna smiled, visibly touched. "Thank you, Julia," Jenna replied, her tone equally generous. "And for what it's worth, hearing your story reminded me of something too. Being approachable, being that safe space, isn't weakness. It's powerful. Maybe I could stand to loosen the reins a little more sometimes and let my daughter know that, yes, I'll always hold her accountable, but I'll also always listen, no matter what." The audience let out an audible "aw," followed by applause. It was clear that the clash had transformed into a shared understanding, both women allowing space for the other's truth without surrendering their own. Julia nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. See, that's the thing I love about conversations like this. You don't have to agree on every detail, but you leave with a deeper appreciation for the other person's perspective. And that's something the world could use a little more of these days. "Couldn't agree more," Jenna said, leaning in, as if closing the circle between them. "And we need fewer shouting matches and more honest exchanges. And I have to say, Julia, you held your ground beautifully. I know our viewers are going to be thinking about this one long after the credits roll." Julia tilted her head, giving Jenna a playful smile. "So, are you saying you win this round?" The audience laughed again, waiting for Jenna's response. With perfect timing, she smirked. "I think I'll let the viewers decide, but yes, I'll take the win tonight." Julia laughed, clapping her hands together. "Fair enough, I accept it, but only because you argued it so well and because you made me cry, which is very unfair in debates, by the way." The studio roared with laughter and applause, the tension completely dissolved now. As the closing music swelled softly in the background, Jenna addressed the audience. "Parenting is complicated, it's messy, and it's beautiful. Tonight wasn't about proving who's right or wrong. It was about showing that there's more than one way to raise a child with love. And if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the effort, the care, and the heart we put into it matter more than the method." Julia nodded, her voice warm and steady. "Exactly. We're all just trying our best. And if tonight's conversation makes even one parent out there feel less alone or more confident in the way they love their kids, then I think that's a victory for both of us." The audience gave them both a standing ovation. The cameras panned across the cheering crowd, then back to the two women smiling at each other, no longer opponents, but fellow mothers who had shared something real. Jenna extended her hand across the table. Julia took it without hesitation, their handshake firm, genuine, and met with another round of applause. As the credits began to roll, Jenna addressed the audience. "This is what Jenna and Friends is all about. Conversations that challenge us, move us, and remind us that we're all in this together. Thank you, Julia Roberts, for being so open, so honest, and so real with us tonight." Julia smiled into the camera, her eyes still glistening. "Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, everyone. This has been unforgettable." The screen faded to black on the image of two women side by side, smiling. Proof that even the fiercest debates can end not in division, but in respect, laughter, and a shared humanity. If you loved this unforgettable conversation, make sure to hit subscribe for more celebrity debates, heartfelt showdowns, and surprising moments of honesty on live TV. Drop a comment below. Did you think modern parenting needs more rules or more understanding?